Welcome to Armor Firearms and Training. My name's Dustin. I'm your host today. I'm also the firearms instructor and owner of Armor Firearms and Training. I'm glad you guys are here. I'm a 20-year law enforcement veteran. I'm a law enforcement firearms instructor, an NRA pistol instructor, and award-winning pistol coach. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to safely handle a firearm and be proficient with that firearm today. In this video, we'll cover these 5 areas: the introduction to handguns, introduction to ammunition, the basics of marksmanship and marksmanship skills, and lastly, the basics to loading and unloading a handgun safely. In this segment, we're going to talk about the introduction to handguns. There are 2 types of handguns that dominate the market today. The first type is the semi-automatic handgun. In my hand, I'm holding the Glock 19 pistol. The second type is the revolver. In my hand, I'm holding the Taurus 38 Special. A lot of people are familiar with both of these, and so I'd like to talk about some of the differences and some of the pros and cons, in other words, of both of these handguns. The reason for this discussion is so that you, as a first-time user or someone that wants to get into owning a handgun, can have an informed decision. Now, granted, everything that I say today will not be a conclusive list of pros and cons between the both pistols, but I want you to have at least some of the basics understood before you decide to go out and buy. Now, as anything we do with firearms, before we handle anything, we want to make sure that these firearms are safe and they're not loaded before we handle them. So I will take this semi-automatic handgun, I'll point it in a safe direction. I'm going to hit the magazine release button, show you the magazine, there's no ammo in it. Now lock the slide back to the rear on this semi-automatic handgun and make sure there's no ammo in the barrel as well. That looks like a completely safe firearm. With the revolver, same thing. We'll point in a safe direction, finger off the trigger. We eject the cylinder release button, look into the cylinder. Looks like I have no ammo there, nothing in the barrel. That is a safe firearm as well. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about the revolver. Now, the revolvers have been on the market a longer time than the semi-automatic handguns. They are the predecessor to the semi-automatic handguns. So these, at one point in time, dominated the market, and a lot of people owned them before the semi-automatics came up on the market. Now, let's talk about the features, the basic features of the revolver. This is the barrel, front sight. This is the cylinder, trigger guard trigger. This is the frame. This is the grip. And this is the hammer. If I rotate on this side, this button here is the cylinder release button. What it does is when you push it forward, it ejects the cylinder. This is the ejection rod. Anytime you want to unload this revolver, I press the ejection rod, it drops any spent casings or any ammo that's in the cylinder. So let's talk about something. With a revolver, as in most revolvers, from the muzzle to the grip is an alloy steel or metal frame. That matter, revolvers are typically heavier than semi-automatic handguns, especially of a polymer version, as you see here with this Glock. Also, I want to point out that when you pull the trigger on a revolver, it is operating the spinning cycle of the cylinder, the dropping of the hammer, and it's also inside the grip here is a spring. The trigger is operating the cylinder, the hammer, and the spring all at once. If you are a female or someone who has not a lot of hand strength, small hands, it can be very difficult to pull the trigger to make the hammer drop and for the gun to fire. And that's because it's all metal design is operating those 3 things by just pull of the trigger. Majority of revolvers will have a trigger pull of about 8.5 pounds up to 12 pounds trigger pull. That's the way it's designed. If it's difficult to pull the trigger to the rear, it will make it very difficult to keep your front sight on target, and then the pressing of the trigger can cause you to pull off of center. If you have very weak hands or small fingers, that's a difficult firearm to shoot. Now, that's not to say that if with enough training and practice that a revolver can be a very effective self-defense weapon. But I'm just pointing out some of the cons involved with a revolver. The other thing with a revolver is you have limited ammo capacity. As you see here in the cylinder with this Taurus 38 pistol, it can hold 5 rounds. 5 rounds, 5 chances to shoot your bad guy. If you miss, to reload the revolver, like I did before, you push the cylinder release button, eject the cylinder, press the cylinder release button, eject the cylinder and the ejection rod, and that will drop the spent casings. I insert one by one, or if I have a speed clip, I can drop all those rounds in the cylinder at once, close it, and then I can get back into the shooting game. Let's look at the semi-automatic handgun. As you see here with this Glock pistol, it is designed, the only metal parts are here on the slide, the barrel, some minor internal features are metal, and from this part, this line you see here, this midpoint, is all a polymer resin designed by Glock. In other words, it's a very durable plastic. And let's look at some of the features here as well. Front sight, rear sight, this is the slide, this is the barrel. Here you have the lower frame or receiver, trigger guard trigger, this is the grip. You have the magazine and the magazine inside there. On this side of this Glock pistol, you have the magazine release button. Where pressing that can drop the magazine, of course. And this is a slide lock lever. So if I wanted to lock the slide to the rear, I'd engage that slide lock lever. And you can hold the slide back for me. Those are some of the basic features of the Glock handgun. Now, here are some of the positives or the pros involved with the semi-automatic handgun. Right off, let's look at ammo capacity. Number one, with the magazine, particularly this model, it has 15 round magazine as compared to 5 with the revolver. I can carry as many of these preloaded magazines on my person as I want if I'm carrying concealed. To unload this pistol, magazine release button, we press it in, drop the spent magazine. Let's say we expended a magazine, we shot at our bad guy. Let's say we had a bad day, we missed. Drop the magazine, insert the magazine back into the pistol, work the slide, let it go forward. Now I'm back into the shooting game. That's how fast it is to reload with a semi-automatic handgun. Now, because the semi-automatic handgun from the frame and the lower receiver is made out of a polymer plastic, the pressing of the trigger is typically half of that as it is with a revolver. A Glock pistol standard from the factory is going to run about 5.5 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger to the rear to make it go bang. Half as much force is required on the semi-automatic handgun as it would be for the revolver. And that allows the shooter to have a better chance of keeping their sights lined up, front sight on target, and using less force, they can be more accurate with the pressing of the trigger. Also, let's look at the design. Because it's half the weight of a revolver, it will feel better when you're carrying concealed. It won't feel like a boat anchor on your hip as it will with this revolver. Now let's look at some features here. If you notice, the semi-automatic handgun, and particularly this Glock, is a straight and linear rectangle. Very sleek on the sides, not too much that comes out from side of it, and it feels very good against the body because it's very smooth. Look at the outline of the revolver. You have the cylinder that sticks out the side. You also have a hammer that can sometimes dig in your side if you're carrying that inside the waistband. And then you have the big grip. And so for a lot of people, the revolver is not ideal handgun to carry, but the semi-automatic handgun is. So these are some of the features you need to consider before buying a revolver versus a semi-automatic handgun. Next, let's talk about the introduction to ammunition that you need to know. Let's talk about the types of ammunition on the market today. All ammunition falls into 2 categories, rimfire or centerfire. The examples I have in front of me are a shot shell, which is a centerfire cartridge, a 223 round or 5.56 round, which is also a centerfire cartridge. And here I have a 22 long rifle round, which is a rimfire cartridge. Now, let's talk about the features of each round. With this 223 round, this lead tip is actually the bullet. This brass casing is the cartridge or the casing. On the rear, you'll see the circular dot on the back, that represents the primer. Now, how this works is when this round is loaded into the rifle, when you pull the trigger, a firing pin strikes the primer at the rear. It ignites the powder charge inside the casing. Gas and pressure builds up to the point that it separates the bullet from the cartridge. The bullet leaves the barrel and goes towards the target. The casing falls on the ground. It is called a center fire cartridge because the primer is located on the center rear of the cartridge, hence center fire. Let's look at the rimfire cartridge, the 22 long rifle. Lead bullet, brass part here is the casing. If you turn over the back, you do not see a primer. That is because the primer is located on the inside of the cartridge and on the rim of the cartridge. When this is loaded into a pistol or rifle, when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin strikes it on the rim instead of the center. That causes the chain reaction to where the bullet separates from the cartridge. Hence, that's why we call it rimfire. Here we have a shot shell. Inside this plastic is the wad, the pellets, and the powder. Rotate it over the back. In this casing here, you see in the center is a center fire cartridge because the primer is located in the center, just like you see with the 223 round. Hence, we call those center fire cartridges. Now, self-defense and military rounds are going to be center fire cartridges. Rimfire rounds are not considered, generally speaking, a self-defense round. Rimfire cartridges are used for plinking, for hobby shooting, first-time shooters, sometimes children, and small adults. That's a rimfire round. These are usually used for shooting varmints, snakes, armadillos on the farm, and just for hobby shooting. Majority of your self-defense and military rounds are going to be centerfire cartridges like you see here with the 223 that's fired out of an AR-15. These are the two categories of ammunition. Majority of your self-defense rounds, again, will be centerfire cartridges. Those you will find in handgun rounds from 9mm, 380, 45, 40, 357, on and on and on. Shotgun rounds, this one here is a 20 gauge. They go up to 12 gauges as well. And rimfire cartridges are traditionally smaller. As you can see, just from the size alone, you can tell that one is probably more lethal than the other because one is larger, one is smaller. Centerfire cartridges traditionally travel faster than a rimfire cartridge, therefore it causes more damage inside the body. These are the two types of ammunition on the market today. Now I'd like to get into self-defense rounds, where we talk about self-defense cartridges as far as centerfire cartridges go. Here I have a demonstration or an example of a full metal jacket round and a hollow point. This is 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. This is a 40 caliber round. Both of these are. You can tell that they're centerfire cartridges because the primer is located in the center. Now, what I want to turn your attention to is the types of bullet that you see here. One is brass with a flat top. The other one is brass with a hollow point with a plastic insert or a rubbery insert. This is a full metal jacket round. This is a hollow point. Full metal jacket refers to the copper or alloy coating on the bullet itself. It allows for a cleaner shot, but one of the negatives is if you use this for self-defense round, it will over penetrate the intended target. If you use this round in the self-defense of yourself and others, and you fire this round against a bad guy, chances are it will penetrate the bad guy, it will exit the bad guy and continue to travel until it hits something harder that causes it to stop. That is why they came out with hollow point rounds. Hollow point, as you see, is hollow. When this round is fired, it expands much like a flower or mushroom when it hits a soft tissue target. And because it creates a greater surface area, it slows down faster inside the soft tissue target. These are made for self-defense for that reason. They do not over-penetrate typically. This is what you need to carry for self-defense, are hollow points. At the gun range for practice and training, you need to carry and utilize the full metal jacket rounds. If you were to load both of these in the magazine, insert it to the gun, and go to the range and fire all of them sequentially, you will not feel a difference in terms of firing the handgun. The bullet only determines what happens when it hits the target. So just remember, full metal jacket rounds are for training only. Hollow points are for self-defense. right, let's talk about sight alignment. If you look on this semi-automatic pistol, you see here located is the front sight and the rear sight. Now, the reason why these are on these handguns is so we could level the pistol out and center it on our target. Since this is a linear object, if we point it away from us, it's going to be difficult to line it up from our perspective of shooting behind the pistol. That is why they invented the front and rear sights. The goal and objective is that we line up the rear sight with the front sight. Now, there's 2 points we want to point out about the proper sight alignment. Number one, the front sight and the rear sight, when lined up perfectly level, will be equal. One will not be higher than the other. They both will be the same height. The second point of proper sight alignment is when looking through the rear sight and finding the front sight, there will be equal daylight on each side of the front sight while looking through the rear sight. So the front sight and rear sight in review, front sight and rear sight are the same height. There will equal space on either side of the front sight while looking through the rear sight. That's how we have proper sight alignment. The proper sight alignment allows us to aim at our target. As long as those sights are lined up, we can slowly press the trigger, and when the gun goes off, the bullet comes out of the handgun, travels towards the target, and likely will land at the intended target. Sighting our pistols is very crucial to being accurate. Refer to the graphic as you see here for proper sight picture. What this means is after aligning the front and rear sight equally, this is what the shooter is focusing on in relation to the sights and the target. If you look at the graphic, you'll see that the shooter should be focused on the front sight. That will be in sharp focus. The rear sight will be blurry, and the target will be blurry. The graphic should depict that proper sight picture. So once we have the sights lined up, we focus on the front sight, and the front sight will be in focus. The rear sight will be blurry, and the target will be blurry. That's proper sight picture. In this segment, we're going to cover the following: the proper shooting stance, shooting grip, sight picture, sight alignment, and trigger control. Let's talk about the proper shooting stance. The shooting stance that I promote is called the isosceles stance, or in other words, we call it the combat shooting stance. This shooting stance begins with the feet shoulder width apart, the knees are slightly bent, their torsos lean forward, arms extended out with a two-handed grip on the pistol, pistol brought up to the eye level. That's the proper shooting stance. Next, let's talk about the proper shooting grip with a semi-automatic handgun. If you'll notice, anytime you pick up a handgun, the first thing we ought to do is have our finger off the trigger at all times until we're ready to shoot. When gripping the handgun, we grip it in our dominant hand. Your dominant hand means the hand that you most likely use for riding, throwing, punching, eating. That is your dominant hand. So for me, I'm right-handed, and my dominant hand will control the pistol at all times. I insert the handgun between my thumb and my forefinger, like so. High on the back strap. I don't want any daylight. Finger off the trigger. Nice firm grip like so. With the second hand, my offhand, fingers close together. I want to put them across my knuckles. Palms come around to the side. Palms touching the pistol. Thumbs lay down. That is the proper shooting grip. The proper shooting grip isn't this. It isn't teacupping. It isn't holding it to the side. It isn't doing this. And it surely does not include crossing of the thumbs. Reason why you don't want to cross the thumbs is because the slide will rotate front to back as you're firing the handgun. So in review, firm grip, finger off the trigger, four fingers together across the front of the knuckles, palms go on the side of the left side of the grip, thumbs lay down. That is the proper shooting grip. Now let's talk about the importance of trigger control. Trigger control, when disciplined and pulling the trigger, it allows us to be accurate with our shots. It keeps the sights lined up and our sights on target. If we pull the trigger too fast, it can misalign our sights, causing us to miss the target. So as a rule of thumb, if you look at your dominant finger that's going to be pulling the trigger, you look to where the fingernail starts on the finger. If you rotate it over and look at the back side or the inside of the finger, that should be the midway point between the tip and the first bend of your finger. That's where the placement of your finger should be on the trigger every time you pull the trigger. When you grip this pistol, place your finger on the trigger in that exact location. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the trigger on this Glock pistol and give you a demonstration of what that looks like. So as we pull the trigger, we want to slowly press the trigger to the rear until it stops in one steady motion without interruption. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. That click means, that signifies the gun is fired. That's what we want when we're squeezing the trigger. It should not be fast. It should be as slow as possible. The more slowly you squeeze the trigger, the better chance you have of keeping your sights lined up, which increases your accuracy with your shot placement. And what more do we need is accurate shot placement if we're dealing with a threat. That's the importance of trigger control. The slower we pull the trigger, the better chance we have of keeping our sights lined up, which increases our chances of hitting our bullseye or our target. Don't forget how important trigger control is. All right, folks, let's talk about how to properly load and unload your handgun. So what I have here is a Glock 30S pistol loaded with what we call dummy rounds. They are inert rounds with no primer, no gunpowder. This is just brass and plastic, so this cannot be fired. First thing we want to do is to make sure we've got an empty and a safe weapon. So finger up off the trigger, gun pointed in safe direction, just work that slide, lock it back to the rear, visually and manually inspect that pistol to make sure there is nothing in the chamber, no magazine in that pistol. So the first thing we do after we hand pick up the pistol with our finger off the trigger, we're going to rotate over to the side so we can see inside the magazine well. With our support hand, our left hand, you want to grab that magazine with the base plate in your palm, finger along the back side of the magazine, thumb on the side supporting it, like so. At this point, you want to insert the magazine and have your hand follow the magazine all the way in until it clicks, at which point you'll give it a double tap to ensure that it's properly seated, like so. Next, we need to load one round into the chamber. We do that by properly gripping both sides of the rear of the slide with our palm on one side, four fingers on the other, forcefully pull back until the slide stops. And now at this point, we just let it go. It slams forward. The spring does all the work by slamming the slide forward. And when it does that, it takes the top round in the magazine and loads it in the chamber for you. That's how you properly load a semi-automatic handgun. Doesn't matter if it's a Glock, Smith & Wesson, or what have you. Now, to unload, we rotate that pistol over to the side, finger off the trigger still. With our thumb, we depress the magazine release button. With our thumb, with our left hand, we remove the magazine and set it down. Now, there's still going to be a round in the chamber. Same way that we loaded it, we're going to unload it by pulling the slide back to the rear, palm on left side, four fingers on the right. Snatch that slide back to the rear, and at this point we're going to engage the slide lock lever that you see here. What we're doing is, if you look at the indention on the slide, it goes up. We want to marry the slide lock lever with that indention and to push that slide lock lever upwards. Once you do that, it locks the slide. We can bench the weapon. That's how you unload the handgun, and particularly the semi-automatic handgun. All right, folks, this concludes our basic handgun training video. Next up is the live fire portion of the class. By now, you would have received an email from our company explaining the range location and other details you need to know before coming out, to include the waiver and if you're bringing your own firearm. Please see that email for that important information. That concludes this portion of the class. We're glad you're here, and thanks for choosing Armor Firearms and Training. We'll see you at the range.